From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans. Expanding your horizons and making connections globally can spark new ideas and collaborations. That's what our guests today hope to accomplish by attending the recent World Community Development Conference in Australia this past June. Marilyn Schlake is an associate extension educator and Cheryl Burkhart-Kriesel is an extension specialist. Both are with Rural Prosperity Nebraska. At the conference, they connected with peers from over 20 countries to exchange best practices in community development. We'll hear key takeaways that reinforce the universal importance of community engagement, strategic planning, and leadership. We'll also hear about potential future collaborations that this trip sparked, from joint research projects to exchanging community programs. Hi, Marilyn. Thanks for joining me.
Well, hello, Ryan. Thank you for the opportunity.
And Cheryl, thanks so much to you as well for being here.
This is great being here.
Absolutely. So you both attended the World Community Development Conference in Darwin, Australia. As we mentioned, that was back in June of 2023 this year. So what inspired you to reach out globally? And then what are some of the new collaborations that you established there, especially with Scotland and Australia?
This is Marilyn. This was my first experience attending a global conference, and I had attended a few national conferences before that exposed me to international colleagues visiting here in the United States. So it was really a great experience to see how their communities interact with them when they're doing community development, and to learn firsthand their experiences within the context of their community. So it was an eye-opening experience that I really appreciated the opportunity to explore.
And I've had the opportunity to actually interact with people from other parts of the world on a couple of other occasions. And for me, it just reinforces just new information, new possibilities, and just learning from others. In the community development world, there's always something to learn. So even when it may be a little bit different than your home environment, you can transpose it and put some practices into action. So it's just that expanding your ideas.
Great. And Cheryl, both Australia and the U.S. have remote rural areas. So can you elaborate on the similarities that you observed in community development between these two regions, especially in a session I know that you were in about rural people coming together at regional cattle sales?
Sure. So that is one commonality we definitely have between rural Nebraska and a lot of places in Australia. It's very remote and it's geographically remote. So we end up doing many of the same things, just in a little bit different ways. So the cattle industry is a big industry in Australia, just as it is here in Nebraska. And one of the sessions we sat in on was a researcher in Australia who had really looked at cattle sales, and where we would talk about being at the sale barn, the cattle sale barn, all of their facilities are open. So it's a little bit different, but similar. And so they really were focusing in on what kind of social capital is built when these ranchers come together, and because it is a social event, and they're perhaps even more geographically isolated in a lot of aspects than even we are in Nebraska. So that study just got us thinking about the role of people coming together and what that means. And so we do that in a lot of different ways. We do it by events in rural areas. There's just a lot of opportunities to make that happen. But it's not only for community building, but it's also about individual well-being and mental health. So again, I hadn't been thinking in that direction, and it just sort of opened up a whole new avenue of ideas for me.
And I know the conference highlighted Aboriginal community development techniques there in Australia. So Cheryl, can you share some of the innovative techniques or strategies that stood out, and then how they might apply to communities in Nebraska? And then Cheryl, after you, would love to get Marilyn's take on that as well.
Absolutely. So one of the things that this conference really did focus in is on Aboriginal efforts, how they're looking at community development, and just really growing that whole avenue and that population, and really supporting them in a culturally sensitive way, in a way that makes sense for them. So one of the things that came out loud and clear is even in how the rooms at the conference were organized, rather than having very traditional chairs lined up, for instance, everything was done in a circular fashion, so that actually, if people wanted to, they could see each other maybe a little bit better, interact a little bit better, and a variety of things.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me was they reiterated quite a bit the importance of recognizing the gifts of every person within the community and how that builds on the strength of the community. They gave some examples of you start with the spirit of the community. What are the traditions, the cultures, the celebrations that are important to that community, and respect that heritage? And then as you work with the community, you work with the relationships and the connections that individuals have, and the importance of asking, listening, and sharing the stories. For the Aboriginal communities, they call it yarning, telling the story of their personal experiences and their cultural histories, and how important it is to listen and to hear what they are saying in order to enact community development with that community. So that was one of the things that we do here in Nebraska, but I think it just re-emphasized the importance of that storytelling within the community.
Great. And so you ask about Aboriginal learnings from this conference, and I think there's a lot of different things that come into play. Marilyn, you mentioned about listening. I couldn't help thinking about it's so important to have that relationship. So you have to go slow to go fast. And so listening, being open to new ideas, watching people interact, so that you are, I guess, culturally sensitive of how this group works. And in some respects, it's no different than when you enter any kind of rural community. We all have sort of rules of engagement of sorts, but these were very obvious. And so it's just a little bit different take on it. And it's a reminder of how every community has their internal rules of how they operate. Well, on reserves, as they're called in Australia, there are different rules of how things happen. So it's really a great experience to sort of reflect back on what you do and how you do it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the importance of community engagement was really reaffirmed at this conference. Marilyn, I know you spoke to me a little bit about an Aboriginal community called Little Wells. Can you discuss some of the key components that were shared by the presentations about work with the community of Little Well in Australia, and how these components resonate with the work that you both do here in Nebraska?
Sure, Ryan. What sat in on a session that was from the Community First Development, which is a nonprofit organization in Australia, and they shared what they have done with Little Well, what really embeds a lot of the community development work that we do here in Nebraska as well. But there were 7 components that they really highlighted. As first was engagement of community members in the decision-making process, establish a clear and shared strategic direction, embed the local culture, honor the past, preserve its relevance to that community, and provide for effective administration. So there is the mechanics of also doing community engagement, and we call that the backbone organization. The one that provides just the organization of change, working with the entities, organizing volunteers, tracking progress, kind of just that backbone work that needs to be done to make things going forward. And then a couple other ones has to do with accountability of the people that are working in the space, accountable to the community members. Letting them know the transparency of the progress and new developments, what changes as more information is gathered, the legitimacy of the entities that are working in this space on behalf of the community. And finally, strong leadership is needed, having individuals lead, who act on the behalf of the community, are transparent and encourage action going forward. So they were really detailing how this action transpired the community of Littlewell into a thriving community, and using the principles of community development.
Cheryl, I know that you weren't only learning things at this conference, but you both presented about the work that you do with Nebraska Extension, Rural Prosperity Nebraska. And can you just talk about what you presented or the information you shared about what's going on here in Nebraska at that conference, and dive deeper into programs like the Red Carpet Service and Marketing Hometown America?
Sure. Yeah, one of the joys of going to a conference is you're not only a sponge, you're not only learning, but you also equally share what you have in your community and what you have in your state, what's happening. So in particular, we had a couple of different programs. Red Carpet Service is one where we're really looking at how to make the best first impression of your community and working with frontline employees to help do that. Well, that's pretty universal. And so that's a good fit for a lot of rural areas, a lot of community areas, to be honest. And then another one was Marketing Hometown America. And that's really focused in on new resident recruitment and retention. And again, that's a fundamental component to most community building opportunities. So both of those are really logical sorts of things that we could share in Nebraska, what's happening, and then what we have to do. We also had the opportunity to share a little bit about a tool, a community engagement tool that I was a part of in Nebraska that actually helps on the natural resource side. And again, when you're in very rural, remote areas, natural resources, in particular water, is a big deal, and it's definitely a big deal in Australia as well as a lot of other countries. So that was another way to sort of share what we know and hopefully leverage and allow them to pick up on it and maybe use it and customize it to their location as well.
I know there were 24 countries represented at the conference. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Perfect. So, Marilyn, maybe you could start with just some of the standout lessons or insights that you gained from this now as you're over a month, 2 months removed from this experience, what you gained from listening to people from around the world, and then how all of those perspectives from around the globe influence your approach now to community development work.
The conference reaffirmed the importance of community engagement and the conversations that you have within the community from communities all around the world, and in bringing people together to bring forth their ideas, the values, and the opportunities that members of that community deem to be important. Those values and those decisions that help guide the future directions of the community, ones that benefit the entire community. So it reaffirms that individuals are in control of their own community and they can help guide that future. And there were some exercises that really stood out that I think can be incorporated into some of the programming that we have here. Can I share a story, an Aboriginal story that was shared with us that I think really kind of is indicative of community development and community engagement?
That would be great.
Okay, this is an elder story, an Aboriginal elder story. It says, if you live in a community you love, you can stand, but the wind will blow you over. If you live in a community you love with people you love, you can walk together, but maybe not in the right direction. If you live in a community you love with people you love and you work together, you are like a kangaroo, and kangaroos cannot jump backwards. So I think that's just very indicative of what community engagement and community development is about.
You know, you can buy in and understand. And then all of a sudden at the end, there's this little twist. It's like, oh, this isn't the US. We're talking about a global stage. And so for me, one of the things, my takeaways is that there were a lot of commonalities across the attendees. I mean, we all have We all have challenges. We all have opportunities. There are possibilities. And many of these, as we would listen, we could relate to very easily. They were very similar. But then all of a sudden, there'd be some twist where we would hear something that was just a little bit different. And it got us thinking about, so how does that relate in the U.S.? Or how does that to relate even into rural Nebraska? And so to me, that's one of the gold nuggets that I take from reaching out and going to opportunities that aren't in the U.S. It's just that you can see your own work in a different way, and you bring in new insights and new ideas. And so one of the phrases that I always kind of lean on a little bit is that if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And so reaching out, interacting with people across different countries, across different expertise areas, really gets you to open up and see opportunities. And those opportunities can be incredibly tangible, like working with other researchers or other practitioners in other countries. I mean, both Marilyn and I have had the opportunity to interact on a fairly close level and get to know a couple of people, and you just don't stop doing that. And so with email and Zoom and all these great tools, you can develop those collaborations that will probably end up into research opportunities or writing opportunities. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. So for me, these kinds of opportunities and conferences are investments not only for me, but also for rural areas in Nebraska.
Well, it sounds like such a great experience, and certainly indicates that, no matter where you are in the world, there are certain similarities that kind of run through every community, and the work that you're all doing with your colleagues in Nebraska Extension and Rural Prosperity Nebraska is truly great, and so good for not only Nebraska communities to learn from, but obviously those around the world. And it's great that you're still seeking to learn from others. So thank you very much, Cheryl and Marilyn, for sharing your experiences here. And do check out more about their work. We'll have an article up on our website at cap.unl.edu. And you can also find links there to Rural Prosperity Nebraska. And we'll be sharing those in the podcast description as well. So once again, Cheryl, Marilyn, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.